Alright, and I'm back. So I'm going to give everybody a second to log back on here. Still trying to get my live chat back online. Am I streaming? It says I'm streaming. YouTube doesn't say I'm streaming yet, though. Oh, live now. There we go. Oh, there's a 10-second delay. Good to know. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We're going to start talking about political parties now. Looks like I lost my one student. Anyway, so we're going to talk about political parties now. We're going to talk first about the role that parties play in governing America. We'll talk about the two-party system, how it works, and how it compares to other nations. We'll talk about the history of parties in the U.S. and the idea of party systems. We're in the sixth, although I want to say the seventh. We'll talk about why Americans fervently believe in their political parties but dislike partisanship. And we'll talk about whether the United States has grown too partisan, too polarized. So, first off, quick definitions. First, what is a political party? Well, a political party is a group that shares political principles and is organized in order to win elections. And this is, by the way, what distinguishes a political party from something like an interest group. You know, the Democratic Party is a group that shares political principles, and the Sierra Club is a group that shares political principles. The difference between the two is that the Democratic Party's goal is to try and win elections and make change that way, whereas the Sierra Club is going to be trying to make change through other means, like pressure campaigns and things like that. We'll talk about interest groups a little further on. Partisanship is, kind of a vague term. It means behaving in a way that supports a political party, right? So taking the side of a party, espousing a viewpoint that reflects the party's principles or position on an issue, all of that is partisanship, right? And we can see that partisanship in the United States is growing over time, right? So this is the average gap in the percentage of people taking a conservative position across 10 political value questions. You can see that our divide between race, religion, age, education, and gender, all of those they've gone up somewhat, especially with age here. We've seen a near doubling in the age gap. Similarly, religion has also gone up, right? We're seeing some increases, but all of them are kind of down here in the weeds, right? We've even seen kind of stability in terms of divides among the races. But among members of different political parties, massive and growing divides. Right? So we'll talk about that throughout this chapter, actually. So what's the point of a political party? What do parties do? Well, parties have a number of different roles. First off, they champion ideas. Parties create a brand that gives people an easy way to find candidates who more or less share their views. I have a colleague of mine who wrote her dissertation on the idea of parties as brands, and this idea that what a party does for its politicians is to present an easy way for members of the public to find them, right? If I know I'm kind of on the political left, well, I moved out here to Las Vegas. If I moved out, I actually moved slightly after the 2016 elections. But if I had moved slightly before the 2016 elections and I had no idea who any of these people are, well, I vote Democrat, right? And that's probably going to get me most of the way to where I want to be. So parties champion ideas. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be a Democrat right now? Well, what does it mean to be a Democrat? Well, it means that you want to do something about healthcare and support more humane immigration policies. And what does it mean to be a Republican? Well, it means that you don't want to do anything about healthcare and you want to put immigrants in cages, right? So parties champion these ideas. Parties select candidates, right? Gonna make another Parks and Rec reference, but if anyone remembers that episode where Leslie and Ben are both approached by outside actors. In one case, the Indiana Democratic Party. In the other case, Jennifer Barkley. Both go up to Leslie and Ben respectively and say, hey, we think you would make a great congressional candidate. So parties do that, right? Parties select candidates to run for office at every level of government, with the slight exception of local government. So local government offices are officially nonpartisan. That doesn't mean parties don't play a role. Parties are definitely spending some time, recruiting people and developing that capacity, but they can't do it officially in most Western states. West of the Mississippi, we had back in the 19 teens, we had the progressive movement in the United States. And the progressive movement was a reaction to the rampant political corruption that characterized the late 19th century Gilded Age. One of the things that they were fighting against were party machines in many of America's major cities. And so what they did is they tried to make it illegal they tried to make it so that in municipal elections you didn't have the party on the ballot next to the politician's name. That they made it illegal for politicians to identify with a particular party when running in municipal elections. And so if you look at Las Vegas City Council, you're probably going to see some people who are conservative, some people who are liberal, some people who are in their personal life Democrats, and some people who are in their personal life Republicans. But they're not allowed to run as Democrats or Republicans for city council. The same is true of county offices in California, although not in Nevada. In Nevada, we do have partisan county offices. But many towns and cities have nonpartisan municipal elections. We'll talk about machine politics and what that was, but in further detail. But parties mobilize the voters. Parties get people to vote for candidates, right? They raise money, they hire consultants, they craft advertisements and run them on TV, they do polling, they organize phone banking and canvassing. As I've said before, they'll even drive you to the polls if you really need a ride, right? They also spend some time trying to suppress and demoralize the other side through negative advertising. Finally, of course, or I guess not finally, parties do organize governing activity after the election. They set up the agendas, they line up votes, they organize basically the teams in our legislatures, both at the federal and state level, right? So, we have partisan control of houses of Congress and houses of the state house, and parties organize that activity within themselves. So, parties also help integrate new groups into the political process. Parties are one of many agents of political socialization. They provide education about how the government works, how it should work, what policies one should support. Obviously, parents, peers, schools, and other national institutions are also drivers of this process. Parties especially played a big role in integrating immigrants into the polity back during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, during the era of machine politics. Now, I'm not going to say they necessarily played a good role during this period, but they played a major one. So if you landed off the boat in Ellis Island in like 1865, and you're coming in from Ireland or something like, or Italy or Germany, and they shuffle you through Ellis Island and screw up your name and put it on your American documents forever. That's how many of us got our names, by the way. And there you are, standing bewildered on the streets of Lower Manhattan. Well, somebody's going to come up to you and probably address you in your native language and say, "Hey, friend, I noticed you just got off the boat. You look like you're one of us. Could you use a job? Could you use a place to stay? Could you use some friends to go out drinking with? We'll help you out with that." And all you gotta do is make sure that when you get your citizenship, which doesn't take that long back in 1865, right? When you get your citizenship, when you start voting, you want to make sure that you vote the right way. Depending on which city you were in, the right way may have been, Democratic, it may have been Republican. A lot of these machines were like how Democrats maintain power in northern cities. New York's Tammany Hall, the Daley family in Chicago was very heavily tied up into machine politics well into the 20th century. But this was still a way that parties did, in fact, draw people into the political process. Right? So I want to talk now about party systems. Party systems are basically arrangements, setups, the broad organization of U.S. politics into two main parties, two main coalitions. So the party system describes, okay, what are the main parties? Who are their supporters? What are their major positions? And what are they able to pull off electorally? I guess we'll talk about party systems in more detail later. But the thing to understand about America is that we do have a two-party system. So we see a Republican Party, a Democratic Party, obviously the two major parties. Republicans tend to see freedom as a function of how much government is in your life, right? So if you are to be free, then government is supposed to take its hands off of you, whether that hand be punitive or ostensibly helping, right? As long, if you're taking my tax dollars to help them, then that's not freedom, that's tyranny, right? So this is, if you'll remember back to chapter 2 and our conversation about values and ideas, this is a very negative libertarian conception of freedom, right? This idea that freedom is being left alone. On the other hand, the positive libertarians are typically found in America among the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party emphasizes freedom from want, supports government programs that will ensure people have basic necessities. Although it should be noted that the degree to which those government programs are supported among different classes in the Democratic Party does differ, right? Republicans basically agree that government shouldn't provide people health insurance. Democrats are split, right? With typically working class Democrats supporting universal health care, and upper class Democrats supporting means testing and expansion of things like Obamacare and Medicaid. So obviously these are not the only two possible political positions out there, and so it takes a moment to talk about. Let's take a moment to talk about why it is that these are the political positions that we get. And I'm sorry, but I'm bringing up the spreadsheet program. So let's imagine that we have these four parties, right? And they have these numbers of supporters. In fact, I can... So, not a trick question here. Who's going to win this election? Right? If we have the electoral rules that the United States uses, which is called first past the post or single member district plurality, well, and that's all a very fancy way of saying that we have one person from every district elected, and whoever gets the most votes in that election wins. So if we have that first past the post electoral system in this election, oh, by the way, just really quickly, let's just say that like Party A is the most progressive, Party D is the most conservative, some from left to right. But so if we look at this, Party C, the center-right party, is going to be the one that wins that election, right? Great. Okay, so if you are a member of Party A, you're looking at this going, man, if my friends and I had just voted for Party B instead, we'd have a center-left candidate instead of a center-right candidate. And it's like, there's no way, hell, let's do this. See, the problem is that I can't think of how about that. Think of it like that, right? So all the Bernie Sanders supporters are going, damn, if we had all just voted for Biden, we'd have Biden and not Romney, and we'd prefer Biden to Romney, right? So then you get the, so I guess I'll say, so we have the socialists, the liberals, the moderate conservatives, the strict conservatives. I have to decide how I do this example every time. So your socialists are saying, man, we could have had a liberal instead of a moderate conservative, and maybe that would have been better. So what you see in the next election is I should do da-na-na. Who wins this election? Right? What you see is that in this new election, these two groups group together to form a party that makes up about half of the electorate, right? And in this example, there's 20 voters, and they win, right? Because these folks split the conservative vote. So what happens next? Then obviously, in the real world, we don't have just 20 people in a district, and so there's going to be like 1,000 votes for one and 1,001 votes for the other, and that is kind of how our political system is organized today, right? That's basically it. These are the Democrats, these are the Republicans. So that is, by the way, a thing called Duverger's law. Maurice Duverger was a French sociologist in the late 19th century. He was interested in voting systems. And Duverger's law says that as long as you've got a first past the post electoral system, you're going to have a two-party political system. Advantages of a two-party system: it's predictable and stable, right? We've had the same two political parties since the 1860s. And while it means to be a Democrat, what it means to be a Republican have definitely changed over time, we still have a relatively stable and predictable political system. People basically know what they're getting from each party in society. But it's also less representative, right? In a multi-party democracy, those four tendencies that I showed you, which all are very much real tendencies in our society, right? We've got progressives, we've got centrist liberals, we've got centrist conservatives, and we've got the rabid far right, right? All of those are real ongoing, groups of people in our society. And a lot of those groups aren't necessarily represented in our politics right now. Indeed, our politics right now is basically a party of centrist liberals against a party of the far right. And if you don't believe me, look at the reaction to Mitt Romney on the conservative side right now. So who's being unrepresented? Well, there's a lot of centrist conservatives who feel unrepresented by the current Republican Party, and there's a lot of lefty progressive democratic socialist types who feel unrepresented by the current Democratic Party. And so the two-party system, it may be predictable, it may be stable, but it is less representative of the country. So how about third parties in American politics? Well, we do have third parties. We do have other parties other than the Democratic and Republican ones. We got the Green Party, we got Peace and Freedom, or Party for Socialism and Liberation. We've got the Libertarian Party. We've got the Constitution Party, which is this arch-conservative. And so we've got multiple political parties in this country. Typically, they don't do too well. The last time a third-party candidate got any appreciable amount of votes in the presidential election. Sorry, that was my ex-wife. It's got me a little. Any third-party candidate got a decent amount of votes in a presidential election was when Teddy Roosevelt, who lost the nomination for the Republican Party, ran as an independent, as the Progressive Party or the Bull Moose Party, because he was so damn stubborn. He lost, but he did get 20% of the vote. Third parties tend to do better at the state level. So Minnesota had a third-party candidate elected governor. By the way, that was none other than Jesse Ventura. We've seen independent governors of 4 additional states as well. Also, when a third party becomes popular, though, it tends to happen that whatever major party is nearest that party will adopt its policies to try and co-opt its voters. Okay, let's see where this goes. Okay, I'm going to take us through party periods in America, and that's going to conclude our lecture on parties for today. We will continue that on Monday. So hang with me for about the next 20 minutes. We'll talk about party systems, and then we'll finish up the rest on Monday. So party systems. Again, the party system is the pattern of competition in our politics. Who are the major parties? Who are their major supporters? How do they interact? What can they achieve electorally? Things like that. The first party system, which ran from the founding of our country in 1789 up through about the 1830s, was a system that was characterized by a relative lack of party competition, and political parties, mass political parties as we understand them, hadn't really developed yet. It was, it was Thomas Jefferson leading the Anti-Federalists, and people like Alexander Hamilton leading the Federalists. Well, I think actually Hamilton was dead by then. But Madison and Jay leading the Federalists. But most individuals in the country didn't really feel a strong identification towards being a Federalist or being a Democratic Republican, which is eventually what the Anti-Federalists became known as. The main debate during this period was the debate over states' rights versus national government rights. The Federalists were supporters of strong federal government, obviously. The Democratic Republicans were supporters of stronger state government. And this kind of set up the pattern of two parties contesting elections, building coalitions, and organizing competition in Congress. The second party system is the first one to really develop recognizable mass political parties. Individual Americans really did by 1830 start considering themselves Democrats or Whigs, which were the two major parties at the time. And Andrew Jackson was the leader of the Democratic coalition. Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears guy. The Democrats favored small farmers, small farmers and urban workers. They tended to be the states' rights party. They were pro-slavery, pro-Indian removal, and often strongly identified with the American South. On the other hand, the Whigs were a little more pro-business. They favored stronger national government and national infrastructure projects to knit the country together, what were then called internal improvements. The Whigs were also the party, at least Northern Whigs, had a party that was strongly against slavery. This is the home for most abolitionists at the time. That doesn't mean all Whigs were abolitionists, though. Democrats thought that slavery should be left to states and territories, which functionally meant, let slavery continue. Whigs at the time were divided, with some being strongly abolitionist and others not wanting to rend the country in twain, as they expected the end of slavery would do. That party system, the second party system, fell apart over that very issue of slavery. A new anti-slavery, pro-racial equality party was formed in 1857, remember, opposing the Dred Scott decision. That was the Republican Party, who supported free labor, right? So supported, basically saw slavery as an interference in the free market, right? So it was against slavery in Western settlements, and was pro rebuilding the nation in a vision of racial equality, right? The radical Republicans, which were one faction of the Republican Party, were the main force behind Reconstruction. 1864 to 1874, the Republican Party was extraordinarily strong. After that, the country started losing its appetite for Reconstruction, and the Democrats started winning more often. The third party system's Republican Party was strong in the Northeast and the Midwest, where the Democrats were the solid Democratic South. As soon as Reconstruction ended and the vote was effectively restricted to white folks again, Democrats won every office in the South from 1860 through the 1960s. Right? So Democrats controlled the solid South, drove African Americans out of politics, and re-implemented Jim Crow. Party machines. So I talked about this before. Hierarchical arrangement of party workers organized in an urban area to help integrate immigrants and minorities into the political system, usually under the domination of a party boss who provided immigrants with basic services in exchange for blocks of votes when they became naturalized citizens. Ballot boxes were stuffed. They say in the Chicago machine days, you should vote early, vote often. Right? Being dead shouldn't stop you from voting, stuff like that. Very, very corrupt era of American politics. We started seeing a response to that with the very reform-minded fourth party system between 1896 and 1932. During this period, the Republicans tended to be very pro-business. Democrats tended to be less so. The Democrats still derive most of their support from the solid Democratic South, which is still during this time very much pro-Jim Crow. So pressures for political and economic equality were starting to bubble up during this era. This is the end of the Gilded Age, right? The Roaring '20s. There was a major conflict over prohibition and whether alcohol sales should be banned. Democrats were typically pro-prohibition, Republicans typically against. Businesses complained that the prohibition was creating an era of big government. Then the stock market crashed. The Great Depression happened, which was, by the way, the last time we had an economic dislocation this severe. And that brought us into the fifth party system, the party system that reigned in America for most of the 20th century, from 1932 up through the early 1970s. The fifth party system is defined by Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, the Great Depression, and the Democratic Party's response to it. The New Deal being a series of broad economic reforms introduced between 1933 and 1936. So the Democratic coalition at this point was somewhat awkward. The Democrats, the Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, basically got on board with the New Deal so long as New Deal programs didn't include African Americans in them. And so for a very long time, unions were extraordinarily racially segregated, and Social Security, for example, originally exempted agricultural and domestic labor. Guess what most African Americans did during the time? So you saw big city Democratic machines, you saw labor unions, you saw small farmers, and African Americans in the North, and segregationist whites in the South. So the party was pressured by some of its coalition to expand social programs and expand civil rights, while other members of its coalition struggled to start to rein in those programs and preserve segregation. And that started splitting things. The Republicans were the party of civil rights in the 1920s. If somebody tells you that Martin Luther King was a Republican, they're not wrong. But they're also leaving out the fact that while the Republicans were the party of the civil rights in the 1920s, they started very much shifting during the civil rights movement. That leads us to the sixth party system. So the Democratic coalition of Southern segregationist whites and Northern workers of color fell apart, as you might imagine, right? And the 1968 convention, as I already said, was vicious and bloody and involved literal riots in the street for days. The Democratic Party is decimated in 1968, and Nixon's elected. Well, Nixon basically takes his cue from what is tearing the Democratic Party apart. He looks at civil rights tearing the Democratic coalition into pieces and says, we will be the home of racist white voters in the South. Pardon. This Southern strategy basically said, look, Civil Rights Act passed, African Americans are going to vote, but look, there's still only 13% of the population. We can outvote them. So we will go be the party of these Southern voters who are feeling left behind by the Democratic Party and LBJ's push towards civil rights. So the Republican Party adopts the Solid South, and the transformation is dramatic. In 1964, In the 1964 election, every southern state votes Democratic. In the 1968 election, they all vote Republican. And they pretty much keep voting Republican still to this day. So in the 1970s, the parties started lining up in the ways that we recognize today, with the Democrats being the parties of minorities and urban dwellers and the educated, Republicans being the parties of evangelical Christianity, of white folks, and let's be honest, of racial resentment. And we see neither party being dominant in this period. We see very close elections back and forth. Now, the party system matters because it changes our politics. It means new politics, it means new national rules, it means a new playing field for the game that we are all playing. I also, by the way, want to mention, if you look at these party systems, hold on, went too far. If you look at these party systems, okay, 1789 to 1828, 1790 to 1830, 40 years. 1830 to 1860, 30 years. 1860 to 1900, 40 years. 1896, 1900 to 1932, 30 years. 1930 to 1970, or 1933 to 1972, 40 years. And then this party system took shape in 1970. And 40 years after that was 2010. I want to argue that we are actually in a seventh party system, where we are seeing that what it means to be a Democrat, what it means to be a Republican, has dramatically shifted with the Obama election and especially the 2016 primary. And that we are seeing a Republican Party that is much more, that has been taken, not just identified with, but been taken over by, rabid, anti-diversity conservatives, and a Democratic Party that is now almost entirely dependent upon minority voters in urban centers. I would argue that we are moving into, if we are not already in, the seventh party system. But unfortunately, it can take 20 years to recognize a realignment. So check back in these textbooks in 10 years, and I think you'll see that they'll talk about the seventh party system developing in and around 2008-2010. Anyway, I'm going to call the lecture there for today. I hope everybody learned something. I hope you're all staying safe out there, even though literally none of you are watching this right now. Making me feel real supported here, folks. Come on. Let's see. Exams are, again, going to be held not this Friday, but starting next Friday through a week from the following Sunday, right? So you'll have 10 days to complete the exam. I am going to be checking attendance, so if you have not been logging on to Canvas, today would be the day to do that. Tomorrow I'm going to go and make sure that everybody has logged in at least once in the last week, and that will be your attendance points for the week. So make sure that you log into Canvas just so that I know that you're still out there. And with that, stay safe, stay sane, and I will see you next week.